welcome to object-oriented terminology. In this video, what we're going to do is talk about some of the terms that we need to understand when it comes to object-oriented. Again, my goal is not for you to master this terminology after this video. My goal is to introduce the terminology that you need to master over the course of the next several weeks. All right? That's all we're doing. It's just kind of highlighting some of the things that you need to understand. In doing so, we'll talk about the terms to understand. We'll talk about what a class and an object is, what the property and the methods are, and the 4 pillars of object-oriented. Hopefully the last video helped you guys get a little bit of a handle on what object-oriented is all about. Maybe you didn't completely understand it, and that's okay. Again, we're just introducing. But with that, we're going to continue on here and start talking about some of these terms. Now, I know some of you are probably rolling your eyes going, God, this field is nothing but a bunch of terms. Everything we've dealt with is terms. From databases to primary keys to foreign keys to functions and procedures and by ref, by val, and oh God, the list just keeps going on, doesn't it? And I agree with you. And then we throw acronyms in at you, and boy, that just makes the whole thing really hard. I've been there, I know. It's not easy picking this stuff up. Then once you think you know it all, something new comes. And so, unfortunately, if you're going to stay in this career, get used to it. It never ends. It never ends. All right? But with that said, the best answer that I have always told people is ask the question. Don't sit back and say, everybody else seems to know this but me, so thus I'll just sit here and stay quiet and stay panicked and stay non-confident. Ask the question. If you don't understand something, feel free to email your instructors or whatever. Ask the question. Don't go too long without having a decent understanding of a concept. However, there are a lot of terms, and like I said, OO is no exception. It's important to understand, and we will take the time to learn these terms. And in some cases, 1 week at a time, we'll learn them, and we'll continue to learn them as we go on throughout the remainder of this course. But hopefully this introduction at least gives you an idea of what we need to understand. 2 of the main terms that we need to understand is class and object. Okay, when it comes to object-oriented, the first thing we always talk about is class. As a matter of fact, in the previous video, you heard me talk about a class library, that all these classes we're going to develop. So what is this class? Well, you will soon see that a class is nothing more than a bunch of code. It's basically code. It's basically a bunch of variables and functions. Truly, that's pretty much what it is. There's a few other things that we can put into a class that you may have never seen before, but other than that, it really is variables and functions, especially when we deal with the program, the business logic tier that we talked about. All right. The difference is that a class can't do anything. A class can't run it. You can't run a class. You can't say, okay, now I have it all there. Let's run this puppy from top down. You can't do that. You cannot run a class, okay? You can't execute a class. It's impossible. It sits there. And so this definition of a class as a blueprint is exactly what it is. It's basically a blueprint of something that could run later. And this blueprint being the code. Does that make sense in a little bit? So when we say class as a blueprint, that's pretty much what it is, but it truly is the actual code in which we're going to run once we do something with it. And what we're going to do with it, we're going to create an instance of it. And once we create an instance of it, it becomes an object. So in our program that you will actually see next week, when you'll write this, next week you will write a class, you'll see what it does, and you'll actually instantiate it. That's the term, that's the verb for it, for creating an object. So what you do when you instantiate it is that what happens is you tell the computer that you want to make this class an executable. And in doing so, we create an instance of that class, which becomes an object. This object then takes on all the functions and all the variables of that class. And now we can run it. So once our application programmer creates an instance, they can now execute all the functions and all the and have access to the variables as needed. Does that make sense at all? Just kind of keep that in your head. Okay, once again, you'll see this next week. You'll see this working. However, if you're really interested, I have provided for you this week a program that you have written a couple weeks ago, the solution for that program, okay? And you may want to go look at it on how it looks like as an object-oriented program. I put all the functions that were developed in a class, and I actually instantiated it in the code. Go take a look at it. Maybe it might help you understand a little bit more right now, or at least get an idea where we're headed. Every class can have properties and methods, all right? A property is a characteristic of a class, okay? And a method is the behavior of a class. Let's go back for 1 second and talk about this again. So every class is made up of two things, a property or a method. Are there other things? Well, there's some things that maybe overly define this kind of stuff when we get into it, but for the most part, 99% of a class is made up of properties and methods. So properties are the characteristics. If you go back to programming 1, if you remember when you drug a button onto the form, again, I told you in the previous video that that button came from the button class, meaning somebody has written this for us. They have provided us these properties. Remember the property window and the fact that you could change properties in code? Those are properties. In business logic tier, in the business tier, those properties are nothing more than a variable. So when we talk about a property in a class, we're talking about variables when it comes to the business tier. Make sense? A method is called the behavior of a class. Once again, if you go back to that button, remember some of the behaviors that it had? Okay, I'm thinking of the button right now. Let's go to the text box. Remember the behaviors? Some of those methods we talked about? Remember you may have heard the term method, clear, reset text, focus. Those were all methods. Those are behaviors of the class. That's the object-oriented definition, a behavior of the class. What is it? It's a function. It's a function with code in it that does something. So when you hear the term method, that's what that means. It's a function in the code that does something. So in a business tier arena, if you go back to the previous video, I talked about the application program is going to instantiate the class. All those methods and variables become available to them. And then what the program will do is execute, okay, in a sense, call the different functions within the class, which should have all the business logic in it. Almost like what you did in the previous assignment, you called all those functions. Now you're going to call those functions within a class. Once again, I tell you to go look at my example, and maybe that might help you a little bit. Other terms we're going to talk about extensively over the course of the next 4 or 5 weeks will be these 4 pillars of object-oriented. These are called abstraction, inheritance, encapsulation, and polymorphism. Okay, these pillars are the principles to help you write clean and effective code. We'll spend approximately a week each on each one of these. Abstraction, not so much, but the inheritance, encapsulation, and polymorphism, big time. And what are they? They're like optional things you could do with your classes, that you can build into your classes that make it more safe, that makes it more reusable, and it makes it more flexible. That's what these are all about. You will learn all about these extensively, and you'll learn how to apply these as the weeks go by. We will cover each of these in detail throughout the next month, as I said a second ago. So it's not important to go into them now, and we will have plenty of time to learn them in practice. So I'm not going to go into too deep of details, as we're going to spend a lot of time on them going from here. Okay? Well, is that it? Sort of. There are other terms we're going to talk about. We'll learn about constructors, and we'll learn about we'll learn about all kinds of different things. I could go on and on, but your head would start spinning. But we'll learn about a few other terms as we go through. But for the most part, those are the biggies. Those are the ones that we really want to make sure you understand coming out of this course. Anyway, but don't be scared of terminology. I will do my best to relate things to things you've already learned. That's kind of what I did a second ago. A method is a function. A property is a variable. Visualize those two things. You've already done them, and that's what they are. Don't make this hard, okay? It's not supposed to be hard. It's simply supposed to be a more efficient way to write a program in industry. All right? And with that, I hope that gets you started.